my name is Dr. Yewande Oshodi. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And today I'm going to talk about autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder, often people call it just autism. And we wonder that what does that mean? It's a disorder that is known as one of the neurodevelopmental disorders. That means it's a disorder that its onset is in the early developmental period and oftentimes will affect things that have to do with the neurological development or functioning of the child. For example, we have parents who would recognize that their children do not have language, they are not speaking well, or they are not interacting socially, or they have some odd behaviors. So these disorders, when they manifest, we have to evaluate and decide what exactly is going on. There are certain criteria that a person, that's a child or someone presenting for the first time must meet before we say this person has autism spectrum disorder. So very quickly, I'll just mention what the key features are. Now, these criteria, I must say, is not because some people somewhere just decide that, okay, let's just, choose some criteria. They are standardized criteria that are used globally all around the world in making a diagnosis. And this diagnosis is based on the DSM-5. That's a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental and Behavioral Disorders. So according to the DSM-5, to make a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, we expect the child to have deficits in two main areas, two main spheres of, functioning. The first sphere has to do with the social and communicative skills. So we expect there to be deficits in social and communicative functioning of the child. That will include things like, responding to their name, interacting socially appropriately, whether a child is able to do that or the child would rather play solitarily, or if the child is able to, engage in a back and forth conversation without having just a unilateral, one-sided conversation, or a child being able to engage in shared, pleasure and interaction. These are things that would suggest that this child is struggling with social and communicative interaction. The second sphere, and there are a few other things that I may have left out, but generally that's the feel. The second sphere area of deficits would be deficits in the area of restricted and repetitive patterns of interest and behavior. That will include a child, being preoccupied with just one or two toys of interest, or having to line up objects, or having to engage in restrictive routines, or just having interest in certain aspects of toys. For example, when a boy is playing with the car, the boy wants to use the car functionally, but a child with autism will be fascinated with the spinning wheels of the car rather than the whole item. So, and other things could be things like echolalia, where the child repeats words rather than engage in proper conversation. I did forget to mention when I was talking about the social communicative skills, poor language could also be a problem in that area. So having these deficits in these two spheres would make the evaluator wonder, that's the medical person who is going to make a diagnosis, could this child be on the autism spectrum? There are also a few other things. These complaints or these deficits should have been in existence from early on in the child's developmental period. So it's not that the child has done perfectly well and then became age 10 and suddenly started manifesting with all this. No, you expect it to have been there, that the parents would say, we had observed from very early that this child is not playing with their peers, is restricted in their interests, will only eat certain foods, things like that. We expect that onset to have been early on. And in some cases, you get such a history, but they will tell you that the child picked a few skills. That doesn't make it less of autism, because the child that has these deficits early on, by the time they start going to school, may improve slightly in some areas of these deficits. The other thing about making this, deciding whether a child does meet criteria for autism, would be that could be comorbidities. When we say comorbidity, we're saying that it could also coexist with other neurodevelopmental disorders. The common ones that we have coexisting with autism will be conditions like ADHD, that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where the child is hyperactive and inattentive. The second common comorbidity will be intellectual disability. And when we say intellectual disability, the child is not able to function at par with their peers intellectually, and also has deficits in adaptive functioning and cannot take care of themselves as we expect them for their developmental age. Now, the thing about intellectual disability is that you may have those that have severe, different levels of intellectual disability, mild, moderate, severe, or profound. Now, depending on the severity of this disability, it can now help to categorize the autism, whether the child is high functioning or low functioning. So you can have a child with autism that is extremely low functioning, has low intellectual functioning, and so would definitely struggle a lot more than a child that has a very good IQ and still has autism. That would be the child that will say is high functioning autism. Such children could still have the traits of autism, but then they're able to function in a higher capacity academically and able to achieve a bit more than the low functioning child with autism spectrum disorder. Now, when we hear this condition, autism, a lot of parents are wondering, why does this child have it? Why me? Why? How did this come about? Is it something I did? Did I commit a crime? Am I a good mother? Now, the fact is, in the early days when autism was, first described and was, being explored and researched into, some people did feel that, maybe it's bad parenting, that results in, but honestly, that is not true. It is so far from the fact. It has nothing to do with the parenting skills of the parent. Neither does it have anything to do with vaccinations. That's another myth around causation of autism. Research has shown that it is not, at least as at today, when this recording is being made, well into the 2000s, we're in 2018 now, there's no link with autism and vaccines. But one definite thing, thinking about causation, is that there's no clear causative agent that has been recognized, but there are associations with autism. There are things that have been associated with autism. For example, we find out that there are certain individuals that have certain things that predispose them, that may put them at a higher risk of having it. This will include things like complications around delivery, the age of the parent, particularly paternal age, that's a father's age. If there's a history of autism in the family, that's a child that has a sibling, an older sibling with autism, there's a higher risk of it in another sibling. Other neurodevelopmental disorders in the family could also be a pointer to a higher risk. But there is a clear association between the gene and environment. So the closest explanation for causing autism would be that there's a gene and environment interaction. That means there's a vulnerability in the person. That means the person has, some genetic makeup that may put the person at risk, and then there's now exposure to something in the environment, and that could be all those other things I mentioned, complications around birth, exposure to organophosphates, there's plastics and all those things, exposure to certain challenges perinatally. These have all been linked as environmental factors in an individual that has a genetic risk, and then we have autism. So from what I've said, you can see that it's not one size fits all, that, okay, this is the cause in one autistic child, in one child with autism, and you find it in another child with autism. No. So the importance of this would be that families that maybe have a child with autism know that there's a high risk of having another child with autism, and it's nice to be aware about that, know those risks are there. Some genetic counseling may be useful. Indeed, autism has also been found to be associated with other genetic problems, other genetic disorders, like for those that may know, things like neurofibromatosis, tuberous sclerosis. These are medical big medical jargon, so excuse that, have also been linked with persons that have autism or autism traits, in some of these genetic disorders.